We've got a wonderful evening for you here presented with Everplans along with Gateway Financial called In Case You Can Get Hit by a Bus. Boy, this is not a scare tactic title at all. That would never make you pull this off the shelf, but Gene, one of the authors of the book, has decided to spend an hour with us. I'll do my 30-second commercial for Gateway Financial, and then we'll get right into the meat of the things with Gene Newman. So next slide, please. When you finish this book, we'd like to kind of find an end game here. So when you finish this book, you'll have a system for managing all your passwords and secret codes. During my reading of the book, I didn't realize how poorly of a job I was doing at this. And also organize your money and assets, bills and debts all in one place. Obviously, as a financial planner, we know we have software and tools that help us with this, but we'll talk a little bit more about this in the book. Complete understanding of all the medical directives and legal documents such as wills, power of attorney, and trust. A plan for meaningful photos, recipes, and family heirlooms. Really did not know how important that was until my wife received a cutting board with one of her mother's recipes for a famous dessert, and really meant a lot to her for her birthday. We're going to have records of your personal history, interest, and family. And looks like we lost our screen there. We'll go to the next slide. An instruction manual for your home and vehicles, very important stuff, especially if you have parents and or family members who live several states away. And then lastly, your funeral plan and obituary written if you're up for it. Next slide, please. Again, we're Gateway Financial. Our website's mygatewaymoney.com. We did this because we wanted our clients to take ownership of the website. It's financial planning without judgment, and we are your advisor, serving clients locally and virtually wherever you are. Next slide, please. Gateway Financial, I guess we all have to have our commercial of what makes us different. We are fee only. That means we do not take any commissions of any kind for product sales or referrals. We are fiduciary, meaning we are a full-time fiduciary, not a part-time fiduciary. We are legally sworn and obligated to always place the interests of the client ahead of our own. And we are fully independent. We are not affiliated with any brokerage firm, bank, or insurance company. We think that people find that very, very good to know that they're getting proper recommendations. Next slide, please. This is my picture. Since you'll see me soon enough, I've got a little bit more gray hair, but my wife and I are actively involved in the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation. We have an adopted daughter, and we are fortunate enough that we have a very healthy little girl. And we want to do something for somebody else. So that's why we do a lot of work for the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation of Northeast Ohio. Next slide, please. When we talk about fiduciary, we do have a written oath that we hand all of our clients. These 5 things are our premise of what we do. Always put your interests first. Act with prudence. That is skill, care, and diligence, and good judgment of professional. I will not mislead you. I will provide you conspicuous, full, and fair disclosure of all important facts. I will avoid conflicts of interest, and I will fully disclose and fairly manage in your favor any unavoidable conflicts. Next slide, please. If you have any questions, you can email me directly. Obviously, I can be reached many different ways: Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, or our website has some contact information forms, telephone, and email. And the last slide, if you don't mind, is just our disclosure. This is not legal or tax advice today. We do not endorse any of the companies or products discussed, and this is for informational purposes only. But what I do endorse is the meaning behind this book that Gene has put together, and it's talk about planning, and ultimately that's what this book is about, is making sure you have a plan in place. So I think we're done with the slides. Let's get to our open discussion here with Gene Newman. I really enjoyed talking with Gene recently. We spent about an hour together just kind of talking. Hi, Gene. How you doing this evening?
Doing great. How you doing, Todd?
I'm doing fantastic. I just want to remind everybody that we're being recorded today. If you do have any questions, there is a Q&A box that should be located at the bottom of your screen. You can type in there. We do have our handy dandy assistant here working for us and checking and making sure we answer everybody's questions. But Gene, go ahead and talk to me about the reason behind this book and what it means.
Love talking about this, and I love finance without judgment. That's something that's such. I love that when we had the conversation before, and you mentioned that line. It was great because I had mentioned during the thing with our planning, Everplans, the book, it really isn't about judgment. You know, it's not about how much you have. It's not about those things. It's about really identifying what's important to you. And the book, it came into be. It was interesting because I've been working at Everplans. It'll be 8 years in August. And I just came in as hey, I've never done this thing. I don't understand what planning is. It seemed like an interesting opportunity to cover something I didn't know anything really about. And I was kind of scared. It's something that I always thought I understand most of life, but this stuff, I had no idea what estate planning was.
Mhm.
And also, beyond the legal stuff, what would someone need to do if you did have an emergency? If something happens, whether it's to me, whether it's to someone in my family, whether it's to a friend,
Mhm.
and you hear all these stories, you hear horror stories. Someone was named an executor out of nowhere. Someone, had to step in and be a guardian and they didn't know what to do. And even people that had to take over pets for someone else. And it kind of threw their lives off balance and they were nervous that they were doing it right and properly and they didn't have much instruction. So, Everplans is in place to help people get that stuff organized. So after all the years of research, we were approached by Workman Publishing to write a book.
Mhm.
And it was very interesting because, coming up with it, we had all these lessons, my co-authors and also bosses, Adam and Abby. There's just so many lessons that we had. And putting it all together in one place became a really, really interesting concept. And it was a little overwhelming at first because we had so much to pull from and we wanted to make sure we cover everything, but we also don't put people to sleep. We don't scare them. We don't make them feel
Yeah.
too overwhelmed. And we get them somewhat engaged to realize that this is a doable feat in your life and the stuff that you want to do. Here's how you do it. The stuff that's not of interest, you could learn if you want, but you could skip past it and you could get an entire plan in place and know where your head should be at just to help other people in your life that might need it.
Well, I think you said the best part. This is not to scare you.
Yes.
And that's when I kept reading, I kept saying that this book comes from a place of love.
Yeah.
And I really kept harboring back to, you don't do this work because it's easy work. You do this work because it's hard work. And you're not doing it necessarily for yourself. You're
No.
doing it for those you love.
Yes.
And that's when I always look at financial planning, like, what does money do for you? Well, it allows me this. Ultimately, it's for the people you love. And that to me was very special. And you could see, I don't know, some of the people that have talked to me, they've already completed the book and I know they're real go-getters, but you get ribbed a little bit in this book. And I like that. This is not a boring book.
That's why they had me on board, because when I was doing it, a lot of times it's going through and figuring out, what could be interesting, what could be somewhat entertaining or revealing about people that people can learn about themselves when they're doing it. And even with the title, which is interesting because most books you figure you either come up with the title first and then you write it, or you think it'll come to you later. And it took us, I'd say, a year before we settled on the title because we wanted to be fun. We want it to be interesting. We want it to be attention grabbing. And my concept for in case a piano falls on your head was too cartoonish, but then in case you get hit by a bus, it was realistic. And everyone that sees it and gets it and understands that this is a phrase that we use all the time. I mean, I know my sister in her business, she'll say, oh, in case someone gets hit by a bus, this is how you run this part of the company. And it's become a phrase that we use over and over, knowing that the odds of it happening really aren't that high. But eventually, what is that bus in your life? And what made it really, the timing was so interesting because when I had handed the first draft of this in, it was the end of December 2019. Little did we know what was lurking for us within the next 2.5 months, because handed in, and then all of a sudden March, and we're starting to do the first draft, we're starting to do things, and everything starts shutting down. And people are all of a sudden very concerned about their family, their safety, their future. And it allowed us, so during pretty much the entire that year of the pandemic until it came out at the end of last year, at the basically December 2020, the last week it was released, all of a sudden we realized like what is the importance for this. And all of a sudden it wasn't so much we have to explain this to you, we have to make this clear to you what planning is. It became more of a necessity where people thought, I get it now. Like, what is that bus? I mean, the pandemic, it became that bus. And a lot of people, the bus could be something that's been creeping up, like a condition that you have. The bus could be anything that you worry could come out of nowhere, even if you've known it coming. A lot of people think, oh, just because someone might be sick for years, that's expected. It still isn't until that very final moment. And then it always seems too soon. And
Right.
our concept is, if you start thinking about it, getting the stuff in place, not being too overwhelmed, then you're going to take it piece at a time. It's going to come together really well.
Well, what I really liked, so the first time I read the book, I actually listened to it.
Mm.
Mowing the lawn, I think that's my hour of reprieve that I get on a weekly basis. In our world, I read a lot of books, but they're very boring books. I would never tell anybody to read this book. A lot of data, a lot of spreadsheets. We do black and white hard stuff. And I think, Gene, what you brought to me was all the soft stuff. And that's the thing that I think when we as holistic financial planners or wealth strategists or whatever term people are using for us, we miss a lot. We really don't get to say what those conversations are that really need to happen. And that's not always at Thanksgiving or whenever it is, but that soft stuff is what you brought to the table.
Yeah, and a lot of times it's all about purpose, because I think people, you get bogged down in why you do this stuff, that you forget why. For example, if people are amassing wealth, like what for? Just to have it? I mean, what purpose will it serve in your life, and how will it help? And you mentioned the charitable work that you do, which is incredible, because that's another thing that people think, like, how can I help others? I know a lot of my family has always been very much into, how do you give back, and how do you make that a part of your plan, no matter what you're working towards. And a lot, when it comes to the purpose of this stuff, why do you organize this stuff? Why would it make sense to have all your passwords, all your property, all your assets, all your decisions locked down, just so people can understand, like, this is where you come from, this is what matters to you, and this is what your life was all about.
What was that line that you told me? Your life should be a mystery. The
Yeah.
people you love most can figure out.
Yeah. It was a line. I'm upset I didn't come up with it while I was writing the book, because it came up during promotion. And I said, your life should be a mystery that's really easy to solve for the people you care about. And if it's, because everyone's life is a mystery, most of them aren't that exciting or that intriguing. Occasionally we have a few secrets here and there. But ideally, when someone is piecing together your estate, they have to play detective. Now, could it be a really easy detective that just knows where everything is, and it's kind of a board game that step one, step two, step three? Or is that person going to literally become like melding Nancy Drew and Sherlock Holmes together, and they're just going to have to figure out, okay, I know there's a clue here, and they told me they were in Arizona once, and they said something about property, so now I have to search every property record in Arizona? Or do they just have a list and say, here's where all my property is, here's my assets? That's why we say passwords. It was also something that was revealed to us as I was writing it. Passwords have just become the key to our lives in so many ways. Everything we do, every bill we pay, every account we see, every service we use now has some kind of digital portal. And it's made it easy in some ways to be able to access this stuff. But if people don't know how to access, if they don't get access to that, it becomes a very difficult slog to have to figure out, okay, how do I get on the healthcare? How do I get on the home payments? How do I pay the power? How do I pay the internet? How do I access Amazon or any streaming services? So as you start piecing everything together, you realize keys to your life are passwords now, more than actual keys used to be. And then figuring out from there, who are the people that can point you in the right direction. And that's why we always mention financial advisors, estate attorneys, insurance agents, even people that just happen to help you maybe with your taxes, or someone who's a professional.
So I think when you touch about passwords, I think the really difficult aspect is we've got some people on the line who are in their mid to late 70s and some people that are in their 30s. I'm fortunate enough to be a Gen Xer. I've seen both sides of the world.
Yes.
And we have seen this dramatic change. I think when you're in your 70s or 80s or however old you are, the password issue is even worse, because you are used to writing things down and where those things are being stored. And I think that if you look at part one of the book, a lot of that is really talked about, where do I store my passwords? And safety deposit boxes. I remember my parents always talking about the safety deposit box. Now it's the unsafety deposit box.
Yes. I used to, yeah, I made my dad, we made him finally get rid of that. We're like, look, get a safe in your home, because I remember my sister had a key and she had no idea where it was at one point. And then it turned out that when she found it, they were like, you know what? We don't really keep that much important things in there like we used to. But when I realized dealing with people that are older and they have that, it's not so much distrust, it's a lot of times it's confusion about, why do I need this? Why? And certain things have become easier, because I guarantee, I mean, having a DVR or being able to stream things is a lot easier. If someone says, I love this show, I could find every episode of the show right here and watch them over and over again. It is simpler in that way than finding it on a, the guide, having to find when it airs, having to sit down. Like, now having it there, it's made certain things easier, but it's also made things somewhat, protected in a way that might not be completely helpful for them to gain access, because you talk with passwords and you talk with us knowing about like two-factor authentication or authenticator apps, because we're trying to guard security at Everplans. I mean, the company is based around security, because without that, we couldn't even start this business, because we're safeguarding people's personal information on our platform. But the goal when it came to putting passwords together is saying, how do you have a system that's easy to access and is also very secure and easy to update, because passwords change. People have, we can't tell you how many people got in touch and say, found this great list of passwords, I thought I was home clear. And none of those passwords were they were all out of date at that point. And knowing also how to access a phone and a computer, and then from there, getting access to emails if you have to reset passwords, because it really does become the guide to help you find out so much more than you would. Whereas it's made it easier in that sense when you have access, and it's made it so much more difficult if there is no access. And we've also found out that couples, a lot of times, one person is the manager of the passwords of the house. It's the person that's more digitally inclined, the one that's more into the technology, the one that's more into the organization of it. And if something happens to that person, the other person is usually in a much worse place, and it's up to one of their kids usually to step in and figure out, okay, what accounts do they have? How do I reset them? Because you're also not getting bills through the mail. So I'm not going to know who your cell phone provider is. I'm not going to know I'm going to have to go around your house and say, okay, that router, I see that's an Xfinity router. So clearly you have Xfinity cable, or you have this. And I'm going to have to start piecing that together. Whereas having that full list and getting people like ideally on a password manager is the best way to go. And that way it's all in one place. And from there, it really knocks out a lot of the basics of access. And then from there, when it comes to planning, it's figuring out what do you want done with those? Because sometimes, obviously, if two people are living in a household, you're going to want to say, this household's going to go on without this person. Let's make sure it's transferred to the right person. Let's make sure everything gets in the right name. And I'm sure when you deal with things like that, like the title to a home or a deed to a home or a title to a car, you want to make sure it has to be in someone who's living. So it's figuring out, making sure they do that ahead of time, because as you know, the goal when it comes to estate planning is to avoid probate, because probate court is a nightmare on even the easiest ones.
Well, you're in New York.
Yes, in New York. And then I realized in Florida, where I was dealing with it, I found out that that's gotten even more difficult. And figuring out how you could avoid probate and making sure the assets get to where you want them to go as fast as possible with as little hardship as possible. So if there's two spouses, making sure that the house is in both of their names, so it goes to the other spouse. And then making plans if it's transferring to the kids or if it's going to be sold. Those types of plans, it doesn't seem like something would be a big deal. But if you have to spend 6 months or a year having to hash this out later and spend all these fees that just add up, it does become a sense of frustration for family when they're just looking to move on.
So I want to remind everyone the Q&A is open down below if you have any questions for Gene or myself. If we don't get to them, we will respond accordingly via email or to you directly. Gene, first I'm going to maybe make a comment to your comments.
Yes.
I think the average now is 5 emails that everybody has. So just tracking all that down becomes an absolute nightmare. Make sure that people understand where things are. And, sometimes we have to have a cleaner that can come through and help with a lot of that stuff. But a question for you that I struggled with when I was done listening to the audio version, I had to pick up the hardback, the hard copy was I grabbed these sticky notes, and I had sticky notes all over the place in this book. And then I hit about page 30 and I almost threw my hands up, because when you work through this book, there's task, 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 task. It's very well written. And I like that point of, hey, let's just get one thing done. But what happens when you hit page 30 and you go, oh, I'm never going to get through this?
Yeah, that's why the process is really important, to recognize that this isn't a take a week off from work and get it all done. It's an ongoing thing that starts creating really good planning habits in your life that allow you to manage them throughout. So you get your passwords organized. Right now, the password manager that I use, that I know everyone at Everplans, and they won me over. Can believe me, when I started Everplans, I was the guy who had a really difficult to decipher code document with password hints that I would know with certain capitalizations. Again, a mystery that would be impossible for anyone to solve beyond me. And then I realized, as I started using a password manager, I realized, wow, this made my life so much easier. And I realized that relying on that and knowing that these passwords being generated safely and they're always there for me, it was something that I said, I'm working at a place where we're safeguarding information. There has to be that level of trust, because if people are creating these businesses, you have to do that. And I felt the same way about financial aggregation, because that was another thing where I had my accounts all separate. I didn't want them all in the same place. And then once I started using a financial aggregator and having all my stuff in one place where I could manage it, it actually helped me to spot things like a bad credit card charge that I didn't realize happened. Like, wow, I haven't been to Iowa yet. Here's a $200 charge in Iowa. Immediately, you think back in the day, you'd wait for a statement and you'd see this and you'd see probably 20 bad statements of 20 bad charges and figure out, how do I now trace this back to 3 weeks ago? And now you know immediately what's happening with your accounts. You could stay on top of them. You could change them if there's things moving between. If you're waiting for something to clear, you could do it up at the minute without having to log into one bank account or another one, or your investment account, or check on your IRA, check on property or mortgage. It really allows you to start consolidating down. And then I realized the password manager would help someone clean out, deal with all my digital stuff, but it would also give them access to my financial, which then, as they're moving assets or transferring them, they're going to see them disappearing out of there. So all of a sudden, this becomes almost like a bucket that I fill up that someone else empties. And that's the kind of mentality that we're thinking of, especially in the first level, which is about dealing with your stuff. And that's the first step. Deal with the stuff you have. People always get ahead of themselves and say things like, I need to get a will, I need a power of attorney, I need a trust, I need to get this type of insurance, I need to get all my recipe. And we're like, relax. Because the first thing is, you have enough already that isn't organized properly, or that's very confusing, or it's hard for you to manage, or the other person in your household, or for children, whether, a lot of times we're dealing with people with children that are adults now and have families of their own. So they're not going to have much time, but they're completely responsible to take over for some of these things. So that becomes one of the factors. Deal with the stuff you have first, and then start taking the next steps when you say, okay, you know what, I'll tackle these later. And some of it could be a will that people have done 20 years ago. And since then, they've had other kids. They've been married or divorced a few times. They have people that they've named might no longer be living or might be out of the family now, and you want to disown them, and they shouldn't be getting anything. Allocations to charities that maybe you used to support, now you support totally different ones, because that changes throughout life. So there's all these different things that can happen that you want to revisit. But for the most part, starting with what you have is always the best way. When you're cleaning up your home, you don't start buying new stuff, throwing it in there. You say, let me see what I'm dealing with first. And then from there, you get such a handle on it, you're going to realize, I need these things or I don't need these things. And that's also why we always say speaking with professionals is really good, because some people, like, certain things you could do on your own. You can create a will in the next 10 minutes for free online if you have a basic estate. But you're going to want to look a little deeper into that. And you're going to want to make sure that what you're doing is the right way. Because a lot of times when it comes to transferring assets, you want to make sure that it's in the perfect position to go to someone without worrying about the taxes, without worrying about transfer fees, without worrying about if that person might not be the most responsible person, and you don't want them getting a windfall. You want it spread out over time. You want to make sure it goes towards education. So there's all these little things that'll pop up. And if you look at them as like little tiny tasks, because whenever I talk to people, they'd say, is this difficult? And I say, it's not difficult. It's just a lot of little things that add up and make it seem like this massive mountain. But when you're climbing that mountain, when you're going on a long hike, you're taking step, step, step. And if you look too far ahead, you're going to get overwhelmed. I always say, like, the one thing when I've been in Vegas, they say, however far, don't walk a lot of times, because that building is a lot farther than you think. And it's a lot hotter out here than you think. And if you start and you think, well, the Mirage doesn't look too far away. And next thing you know, you're going to be halfway there and you're going to be like,
having your own Mirage.
and Gene, just to quickly jump in, one question that we just got into the chat, if you can talk a little bit about password managers and how they work in conjunction with mobile devices and mobile access.
Yes. Love. And the password managers, there's Dashlane, there's 1Password, there's LastPass. Those are the primary ones. And what's amazing is they really do help you organize all your passwords. They help generate safe ones on the fly. A lot of times you don't even know what your passwords are anymore because they're hidden in this manager. You're generating them safely. You have to remember one main password and then also have a backup system. Usually they'll send you a code. So if you get locked out, you can get back in. You could then share passwords among other people, whether it could be out in the open or you could have them very secret. So you could share them with people without them knowing. A lot of times among families, if they're sharing an Amazon account, they're sharing Netflix, they're sharing other home items, that becomes something. Mobile wise, they also have a lot of magical interfaces because now that most phones, Apple and Android, have the face recognition or the thumbprint, you log into a site, it could pull up your password manager, it'll populate it from there. I've done it with television streaming, which is amazing because you pull it up on a Chromecast or an Apple TV, and you just go into your phone and you hit the password manager and all of a sudden it'll populate. So a lot of times it becomes very secure in that way. And they're also very reasonable. I know LastPass is around $30 a year, which for me, I was using a free version. You got to choose between, it was the computer or the mobile. You couldn't have both at the same time. And it was well worth that cost.
Right. Gene, I think what's interesting about some of those password managers and sharing is I use it for business.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'll have an update that needs to be done to my website and I'll send the developer a one-time usable pass that they can log in and then it readjusts and updates. So it actually adds to the cybersecurity aspect of it. So I really enjoy having that because I used to have 209 different logins and I had to change them every 30 days. And listen, it's out of control. I mean, I think we all know where this is heading. And to your point about a fee for service, I get really nervous when something is free.
Yes.
Because when it's free, understand that you are the product. A la Facebook. I think if we all paid $8 a month for Facebook, they wouldn't be selling our data everywhere. And is that worth $8 a month? I don't know that the answer is the same for everybody, but I would tell you that we would live in a very different world if information wasn't worth more than gold. Because it is now. Information is the most valuable asset that we have, and it's being sold in exchange, and it's your personal information. So, so password managers I think are great, but taking control of everything you have leads you into the house, and how do you handle the house and all the things. And for me personally, selfishly, this is the area of the book that really got to me because my parents live several states away. I don't know how to operate their house. Yes. I don't know where their hot water tank is. Now I've since learned, but these are the things that I think people are struggling with.
And the home is one of those places that you split up duties. Like it's so common. It's rare that you could say that a household is run 50-50 when it comes to the aspects of a home. Like there could be things that are split up and done that, but for the most part, one person knows about the HVAC, about the hot water heater, about the humidifier or dehumidifier, about the warranty on the roof, about the garage door opener that keeps breaking, about the gutters that need to be cleaned, about the landscaping, there's so many things, the leaking. And then there's someone else who's like, the thermostat's broken and someone comes running and says, okay, don't touch anything. And why is our water bill so much higher? Oh, wow. Because there's a leaking pipe outside that's going into the ground and we're paying for all this water that we're not being able to use. And those are the types of things that you could tell the person that owns the home and is responsible for that versus the people that aren't. That's why you'll learn why was dad always so crazy about the thermostat, because he paid the power bill. Like everyone else is like, oh, who cares if I leave the lights on? Who cares if I leave the door open with the air conditioning blasting? He's like, your dad, because he's like, I see the bill, you don't. One day when you see that bill and you think, why is my electricity bill $200 this month? And it's like, oh, because we basically left an air conditioner running in a room we don't use. And those are the things that one person will be, once someone has to take over for that or understand it, they might all of a sudden have more sympathy. You know, a lot of times people that have kids, they realize they're like, I see what my parents put up with now. I get it now. I understand it. And that's the type of planning that we're trying to be proactive about. And when people look at their home and they just take a walk through, it reminded me of as a kid when my dad walked around with a camera and he was taking pictures of everything in the home. And I'm like, what are you doing? And he's like, well, we have insurance and I want to make sure that I'm taking these pictures, I'm putting them in a safe deposit box, which again now would be online in the cloud. And he said, I'm taking these because if something happened, we had any damage, water, fire, theft, I could then show these pictures to the insurance company. And I thought immediately, for some reason, that clicked in my head is, wow, that's genius. You know, wow, you'll know what you have. I'll be able to look at these pictures and see if something was missing or damaged, and they could do the value on it. And now we've gotten so much more sophisticated about that, that it allows you to know like what operating system is your home? What are you using? How is security? Security used to be so expensive and difficult. And now for under $100, you can have a really decent, good security system that's monitoring and recording everything at all times.
Yep.
And allow people to understand, not only that, it's controlling your thermostat, it's controlling your air conditioning, it could be controlling home entertainment, lights, music you play around the house. Those are the types of things. And intercom, so a lot of times, you know, people can check in on if kids are at home after school and no one's there, you could make sure that they got home safe. And if not, you better track them down. I know Uriv has a tracking for his kids. That's the one service. What was that, Uriv? It's the service that you said you have on their phones.
We do. We use a service called Life 360, and we use it in two ways. One is to track where all phones are. Life 360 also, our oldest, has friends who have started to drive, and Life 360 will tell you how fast the cell phone is going at any given time. And so that is an added level of peace of mind that we find very beneficial.
And those are the
Bad,
types.
but beneficial.
Yeah, those are the types of things. And when we look at the home, and we broke up the home throughout the book in different ways, which is saying contacts, like who are people that could step in and help out? Because a lot of times there's things as a homeowner you're going to want to fix yourself because you know the cost. And then there's certain times where you got to call in an expert, and you're going to know this person, the HVAC is under warranty for the next 10 years. And if it breaks, this person comes in, and the most they can charge us is $50 or $100. But someone calls in a new HVAC, they're like, oh, here we go, you know, and next thing you know, you're looking at, you know, starting at $5,000, usually upwards of $20,000 if you're replacing an entire HVAC system in a home, when in actuality it could be a $6 part at Home Depot that you could have done yourself. And those are the types of things that homeowners know, because the whole goal is to keep your home in as best shape as possible. So one day, when you do sell it or when you pass it down, it's of the best value, and you don't want it depreciating. And that's how floods, neglect lead to that. And you're going to want you want the upkeep to be really solid.
Yeah, I've got a heartbreaking story. My somebody I know, it's a family friend. He's become ill, and he was put in the hospital, and his home is now empty for several weeks, and he's now going to be in a long-term care facility. Unfortunately, him and his lady friend, who were dating for 30 years, never consummated a marriage, you know, so it's not legally binding. Had discussed, you know, where they'd be in a home. What's going on with the house right now? Who knows? You know, there's no security there. There's nothing going on. And as many times as I can talk to people and tell them what the right thing to do is, you know, we can lead a horse to water, can't make it drink. Those are some of the things that are really valuable information that, you know, since I've started reading the book, I see more and more and more of in my daily life. And obviously what I do for a living, I get to see the faults in everything. So I you know, I really think that a lot of the stuff that we always push away eventually do happen. no
Yeah.
matter how hard we try to blind our eyes from the inevitable things that are going to happen. They will happen. And knowing those things are important. I know, you know, when my dad had an accident several years ago, you know, I was all worked up because so many states away. How do we help him out? How does all this work? And we definitely need to make sure that we have all that house stuff put in order. Where are the bills? And, you know, that generation, typically the man ran the bills because it was single income, you know, married with children. And that was the nuclear family that we remember from the Cleavers. Well, that's not the case anymore. I mean, we know Gen X, we have male and female dual income, dinks for a while. Now we've got, you know, with kids. So the world is very different, and we need to make sure that no matter what world that you're living in, you're not making that bubble and then all of a sudden that bubble bursts and now nobody knows what to do. We need to get everybody involved.
Yeah, and that's the thing I realized, because a lot of times when it was a different household and things were done by paper and things were done by check, and you do that, it could be normal for the household duties to be split. And then once it became digital, whoever was the digital person is the one that manages it, and usually other people know it. But it also splits up things, like when it comes to care, and perhaps, you know, one person is taking care of the bills and utilities and that stuff, but they have no idea who the kids' doctors are. They have no idea who the kids' friends are. They have no idea what would happen if the dog got sick. You know, it's that's the kind of in the dark. That's why we always said, like, when it comes to sharing certain information, how many times do your clients ask, what's your social security number again? Like that kind of thing, because they just have no idea where it is or what it is. And they're not going to, they could, of course, look and say, okay, I'm going to find this old tax return or document. But for the most part, they'll say, what is it? And I remember a lot of times through text, and then you're sending your social security via text or email, and then it gets out there. I was always very paranoid. I'd say, I don't want to have this in my email. I don't want this out there beyond anything that's not a secure portal. And those types of things happen. And it leads to a lot of frustration and lack of communication with a family. And that's why the first stuff that we talk about, the level one, getting stuff in order, it really is more the positive. It's your home, it's your car, it's your assets, the people that you rely on, that rely on you, you know, the passwords. Then level two becomes a bit of a slog, because, you know, it's like any story. You know, you got the beginning that gets you off strong, the finish strong at the end, and then you got that middle, you know, Lord of the Rings journey where you're like, oh, we're just walking way too long. And that middle part it was difficult for us in a sense when I was writing it to keep it the most interesting. But then it was saying, okay, legal documents, you know, let's get through those quick. You know, when do you need them in life? You know, okay, when you're living, you need a power of attorney, someone that can make financial decisions. When you're dead, you need a will. And a trust, whether you're living or dead, it helps you both ways. So those are the three things we're like, this is why you get them. What types of insurance do you have? Because you look at insurance as an expense to cover much larger expenses. And then you go into the debts and you say, okay, what is your spending? What are the expected bills versus the unexpected? And you say expected, utilities, recurring, loans, debt, the things that you have to deal with, mortgage, car payments. But then the unexpected, looking at it and saying, again, a homeowner, knowing that your water heater's days away from just exploding and you're gonna have to get a whole new one, knowing that, you know what, there's a possibility that you might have to look towards some kind of operation or some kind of treatment that, you know, will run you a minimum of 5 to 10,000 because it'll be outside of insurance. Yeah. Certain things along those lines. Your property might need to be reevaluated. There could be foundational issues. Your car expenses become huge. You might be looking at a move or other resources you're going to need to take from. But those are the types of things that are harder to tackle. And then the medical stuff gets more difficult because it's saying, what are you dealing with? What ailments? You know, because we talk about the home operating system as part of getting your home together, walking around. But we also do the personal medical journal, which is all about getting your entire body in order and saying, okay, what conditions am I dealing with that are actually serious, that require treatment? And what are some things that I just deal with on a regular basis? Like, okay, I got a bad hip. I have a bad back. I've had an injury for my knee. I deal with these types of headaches. I wear these glasses. But then there's other things that are like, I require this medication, or I've had these surgeries, and it's important for me to still seek additional treatment. And it's important for my kids to know in case they ever have to deal with this, so they can maybe nip it in the bud. And then filling out an advance directive as well.
And allergies, you know.
Yes.
I I've never had any allergies, but lo and behold, my daughter's allergic to almonds. Well, who knew almonds were in everything? And you know, one time she received a gift and it had almond. We didn't know it was made with almond flour. You know, it's who you never know. And if something happens to my wife and I, we have the guardian set up, but that's something that needs to be in her documents, because she's not going to go to the doctor day one to make sure that she's got all these ailments. And same thing with an elder person with medication. Well, what happens if you need a refill? How do you get that refill for that important medication? The things that we as holistic wealth strategists, or whatever word they want to use now, we don't know.
Yeah,
we really don't. And those are things we don't talk about. And that is on a case-by-case basis, which is, I think, great with your book, is it does give you a system, but everybody lives a different life.
Yeah. That's why, like the side missions, for example, throughout the book, there were aspects that for some people they're necessary. Obviously, kids, if you're dealing with parents or dependents that have special needs, if you have pets, if you're looking towards retirement, or what will those elder years be, and where would you like to live, and what are decisions you have to make if you run a small business or have a side business, or you have any form of income outside of your set employment. How would someone know what to do with that? How would they access it? Would they want it to go on? Is it something that have to shut down? Is it something that other people rely on? So all of a sudden we hear from people, they run little shops, they have places, and they're like, I'd want my kids to do this, but how would the kids is there a succession plan in place so they know what to do? And when it comes to dealing with medical directives, it's knowing those are free, filling them out. The ones like a living will and a healthcare proxy or healthcare power of attorney is so important, because emergencies can happen to anyone at any time. And you do not want families fighting at those moments.
You also need to understand the different designations. And I think that that is something I think that when I take on a new client, that I look at, and I, do you have this? Yeah, well, they offer that at work, I'll get it done. And I think they get it in the email, and they check all the boxes and they send it away. Really understand what's going on there, because do you want the plug pulled or not? The old Terry Schiavo conversations. You might want to hang around. You might not want to hang around. How long do you want to hang around? What type of long-term damage is going to be done? I think those are really soul-searching comments. My wife and I, we sat outside by the fire and had a glass of wine and talked about these things, because I needed her to know what my wishes were. And, talking to her kind of changed what I thought about my own wishes. So it was really good. We don't have to have the same thing, but I don't want to really live in a ventilator for the rest of my days, because the problem I see a lot more morbidity. I do not see as much mortality. I see so much more morbidity. And if you didn't see that in 2020 with COVID, you really better wake up, because people are living in these long-term care facilities for extended lengths of time, including cardiovascular disease and diabetes. They can go on in these vegetative states for 10 years. And it's just understand what those directives are. Really talk to somebody who knows what's going on. And if you don't know, ask. Don't be afraid. Don't feel like you're going to be judged because you don't know all the medical terminology, because I don't know all the medical terminology. My wife handles all of our medical bills. Don't be afraid to ask.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, that's the one thing I realized, because there's a movie I love. It's called The Edge. It's about Anthony Hopkins and Alec Baldwin get stuck out in the woods and they have to fight a bear. But the real underlying aspect was, they said, what is the one thing that people die of when they're lost in the woods? Shame. And it's not about, they sit around, how did I get this way? How did I not know what to do? And they beat themselves up so much that they don't do the one thing they can do to save their own lives. And that's to fight back, to find a way. And I feel like with estate planning and this type of planning, people feel like they should know it. They feel like they're not right. They're not an adult. How do I know this? My grandparents, my parents knew this. And how don't I understand what a will, or naming a power of attorney, or naming a healthcare proxy? So there's this sense of, I think it's not something I want to do, and they'll say it's superstition or whatever, but for the most part, it's because they don't understand and they're afraid to ask. And it's a lot of times we realize, especially with older people dealing with technology, it's something where they're like, I am smart. I know this stuff. I am a brilliant person. I had a career for 50 years. I ran a whole household. I raised these amazing kids. But just because I don't understand what social media does, or I don't understand how to really have access email, it makes me feel like I'm a lesser person. I get laughed at. And for us, we're like, don't worry about it. You could be a 50, 60, 70-year-old who has no idea how a mortgage works, and that's fine because you never had to deal with it. But you know what? There's things that you've dealt with that other people haven't had to deal with. It's like someone could say, you know what, a long haul trucker. I'm like, I don't know how. To me, that's a mystery. How do you do that? How do you drive that much? How do you handle this machinery? And to them, they're like, it's what I do. But maybe they're like, I don't understand what a trust is. And those are the types of things where we say, especially when you mention without judgments, like ask any question because there aren't any stupid ones. It really is a matter of us explaining it to you, because even for us, we're still learning all the time. There's every day a new thing will come around. We'll hear about like a personal property memorandum or certain last letter of instruction, and we'll be like, you know what? That's an amazing thing. And people might want to know about this, but we also don't want to overwhelm them with complications.
In no legal document, as far as I know, protects you from every circumstance.
Mhm.
You just got to lay out like, these are the 3 or 4 things I really want to protect myself against. I mean, we always have these strange occurrences. So, we have to be cognizant of that. And as far as non-judgmental, I think I told you, Gene, and maybe the rest of the group wants to hear this story. When my uncle died, his wife had to ask my dad how to pump gas. She never knew how to pump gas in a car. So, just being open and honest about, hey, can you explain this? Or have you ever done this? Those are great conversations with people. By the way, what did you do with your medical directive?
Yes.
Well, I don't have a medical directive. Well, why not? Well, I'm worried about this. It's an easy conversation starter, and it shows 2 people that learn. That's the best part.
And I love, and especially when it comes to discussing medical issues, because for the most part, people, they're terrified of it. And a lot of times doctors don't want to bring it up. And I remember early on at Everplans, I spoke with doctors and they said, they worked in cancer wards. They worked in places where there was a high mortality rate. And they didn't want to bring it up to people because they felt like it was the patients felt, or the family felt that would be like throwing hope out the window. Like, oh, you're already giving up on us. And they're like, no, we're not. But having this in place doesn't mean we're not going to care for you and do everything possible. We want you to just to have this, because when it does come and you have 3 family members fighting, one person needs to make that decision. And it usually has to be the one that understands what you want, not what they want, because that's what usually ends up happening. People choosing what my beliefs are. So if I'm 100% willing to follow someone's wishes and pull the plug, if they say if I'm on a machine, that's not living to me. I don't want to be that way. So once it's clear, you pull that plug. But then another sibling's like, I don't care if I don't care if I'm bringing dad home to live in my house in the corner on a machine. He will be that way forever. And all of a sudden, that's when it does become Terri Schiavo, where it becomes a battle, a court battle. It's stressful. And also, it's sad to say the cost of this stuff does add up. I remember someone mentioning to me in my family, they said, do you know how, he was a doctor, he's like, do you know how expensive it is to keep someone alive, especially when they say there's no other options? They're like, okay, great. You're going to be staying in this room to keep you alive. It could cost you $10,000, $15,000 a day, even more in certain areas. If you're in a major city, if you're there, if you require extra nutrients. And are you willing to pay $15,000 a day when the insurance companies say this is not benefiting you? This is literally just keeping them alive. And a lot of people think it's just it doesn't matter, because we've even seen celebrities that are very rich having to eventually say this is the end. But going through that, and if people do lose that, that could be college funds, it could be mortgages, it could be other generational wealth that is swept away because someone didn't say, well, grandma told me that she wanted the plug pulled, but she never wrote it down. Right. So now we're not sure, and no one wants to make the decision because they don't want to be the one that killed grandma. And we've heard that too. And there's so many families that I've spoken with where they've said, we never really got back together again after that. They still blame me for being the one who pulled the plug because none of them could do it. But then they kind of threw it on me, knowing that I'd have to live with that responsibility. And even people that know it's their responsibility and everyone's on the same page, it doesn't make it easier. It's not like someone's going to say, well, I knew, and you tell yourself that, but it's something you could take to bed with you for a very long time thinking, did I make the right decision? Even though they told me, was there hope? Could they have woken up? Is that, and those are the things you want to avoid, because the ideal part of planning is continuity. And it's making sure that you could really look at yourself and say, we made the right decision. We did the best we could with the information we had, and they made it clear. And now we could celebrate who they were as a person and not just complain and be annoyed and bitter because everything was a mess and it took us 5 years and a lot of legal fights to get the things that we should have gotten to begin with.
All right, we got 10 minutes left here. Let's just kind of poke our face in a little bit on phase 3 of the book. And I think
Yes.
that to me was the why of all this. And, this is what really matters, like all the stuff that mattered to you coming out. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, and we say, like, on paper, people, give or take some zeros here and there, everyone's pretty much the same. You have assets, you have things, you have things you care, but for the most part, who you lived your life as, and as a person, why did your life matter? What was the purpose? Why did people, if you had to write what I did on earth and what mattered to me and what actually I'd want to push on to other people, this is where you get to do it. And often this is the stuff that is truly lost forever if it's not documented, because no one's going to know why you worked the way you did, the lessons you learned, how you dealt with major historical events in your life, the first things that you did, the most impressionable aspects, the places you love to go, the things you love to eat, your favorite book, your favorite movie, your favorite sports moment. Like, all these things really help tie things back together and let you know that if you find out that your grandma, like, wow, I didn't know that she had that major in college, and I didn't know that this was her favorite book, because it makes you feel closer to them. And when it comes to photos, again, it comes back to digital, because it used to be you have a shoebox, a couple albums, but now, I mean, the average person probably has over 10,000 digital photos, most of which are garbage or they're completely duplicates, or they're all important in their own way. And you really have to start getting a handle on sorting them, because if someone doesn't have access to those are your memories. And it's great that we have so many of them and so many videos, but it'd be great for the kids and other people to be able to access them and do something with them so they don't disappear forever. Because that's what'll happen if people don't share how you're sorting them, if they're on backups, making sure they're available now, sharing them with as many people as possible. So if someone screws up and deletes their computer, or loses all their stuff in the cloud, they'll have it backed up. And the same with heirlooms, what they mean, because a lot of stuff, I mean, I look at this, it's funny, right on my desk, I have this magnifying glass, and it's for my grandma. She always had it, right on top of her coffee table books, those big nature and those books. And when it came time to go there, it was weird. 15 years ago, or actually it's 20 years now, like, when it came time to look at stuff, I thought, you know what? That's something that would remind me that matter. That's not just something I picked up at a garage sale or did. That's something that she had pretty much her whole life. And I still use it all the time, especially as my eyesight's gotten bad as I've gotten older. So I use it a lot more than I'd like to admit. But those types of things, someone might just think that's junk. And knowing that that is important, and that's something my grandmama had, I guarantee, passing it down to nieces or nephews or someone else, that would be something like that. So you'd want to make sure that those heirlooms, that we always think of things that have value, but that value is so much more important to me. I mean, if a flat screen breaks, I could get another one of those, but you're not going to replace something that was part of your family history, and those types of things. And recipes, as I believe you mentioned earlier, you said about, you mentioned a recipe store.
Yeah.
That's something that, and I know Abby, our co-founder and also co-author, she's obsessed with recipes. And for her, it really hits at home, because it made me realize how my mom's recipes were like life. Like, I'm like, and the fact that my sister took them over, and she sent me recently a bunch of these cakes that my mom used to make, and very close. She's getting close. She's getting, we're testing out. But those types of things, it really does bring you back, and it makes you realize that this is something that will bring a memory. This is something that I'm glad to know, they'll still exist. And those are the types of aspects of planning that people don't think. Again, is that legal? Is that a document? Is that a directive? No, it's something that really was honed throughout history. And it's something that you really want to share with other people, because if that disappears, and we've heard this, Abby's dad has mentioned this chocolate pudding pie that I think I cracked the case on because I think my sister knew about it. But she said her dad grew up eating this thing and was like, I can't. And she's been trying to recreate it for a really long time. And it's something that he wishes he had the recipe for. And eventually, we'll crack the case and we'll get the right thing. But that's something that would bring him back to childhood. And it's amazing seeing your parents or your grandparents transported back from something like that, because it really does it makes you feel so much better knowing, wow, this is what they must have been like as a child. This is something that brings them joy, giving them a book or a gift that they think that, wow, I read this. I remember my grandfather reading me this book. And that becomes so important. Then all of a sudden it jumps up in special. It's like why certain movies I love.
Yeah.
It's because my dad loved them. And,
yeah, and it doesn't need to be anything like an heirloom.
Yeah.
It can be something small. I know, I did not grow up around my extended family, so I don't know a lot about them or what the heirlooms are, the traditions are. But I got to know my wife's family real well. And when her grandmother passed away, we have a small porcelain teacup in our home. And every time I see it, because it's in a very prominent space, I think of her. She was a wonderful lady, and that's the one thing that we have from our house that sits in our house. And is it valuable? Probably not. Does it mean the world to my wife? Probably. Now, is that something that needs to be documented? No, because she had a whole collection of them. But that's the one thing that we got from the house. And I think when her home was, lack of a better term, plundered by everybody else in the family. And again, some people need it more than other people, tools or what have you that are in there. But hey, maybe you worked on an old Ford Mustang with your dad, and that wrench, that one wrench just means the world to you, and that's the one thing you want. And if that disappears, that's going to break your heart forever. So, writing letters. This is my life philosophy, was something that was in the book. I really like that, because sometimes you really don't know somebody that they've never bared their soul, but maybe they bared it out to a piece of paper.
Yeah, and that's why having those templates was really important. Even us writing the letters and using it as an exercise, because I think that it's not about writing a journal and saying this is every day, but just letting someone know why they matter to you. And it was a woman that shared a last letter of instruction, and then that we had as part, and then another letter that I had written for my niece. It was really interesting because it's not about getting detail specific. It's about letting that person know in one page how much they matter to you, how they made your life better, how you cared about them, bringing up little stories. If people are recording videos, again, they're not going to want to sit there and watch a 2-hour video of someone talking about that stuff unless you're giving specific instructions or directions and you really put together a great program. Like if you said, I'm going to actually go through and record all these videos for life moments, great. But for the most part, it's just saying, look, you mattered in my life. I know I probably never said it enough, or maybe I said it too much, but I want you to know that this is what mattered. And that's why people a lot of times will save old voicemails, old texts, because they'll say, this is something that I remember as like a meaningful moment from that person when they showed me they cared. Because a lot of times in life, you don't want to be sappy. You're worried that you're going to be, especially with your kids, you don't, it's going to take them a long time to realize that they're in that position where they're like, you know what, my parents did this and that was really sweet. And I didn't realize at the time because, I was a kid. I'm embarrassed by my parents. And then there's a certain point when that changes and you want to know the stories about your parents. You want to know the stories about your grandparents, and sharing that stuff is so important. And organizing it in a way that doesn't have to be something that you're like, I'm going to wait for the perfect moment. It's like, start jotting down notes today and write a list and say, who do I want to write a list to of those people? Who are the people I'd want to write letters to? And it could be children, nieces, nephews, people that were really important in some way.
It can be your friends too, because,
yes, friends.
Especially when you're retired or you've moved away or what have you, sometimes your friends become your family in a yes. pseudo way too. So don't just kind of make that circle tight. Yes. If somebody means something to you, they mean something to you.
Yes, and we love that. And that's why writing, and one of my favorite little things we said in the book is when you're organizing contacts, put a little nice note in your contact field in the notes description as to what you liked about that person or what made them special. Because it was something someone did for us when they had left their job. They had emailed people and mentioned something nice about everyone they had worked with at the company. Mm-hmm. And I remember it was so sweet and thoughtful that it became this thing that I started doing for a lot, which is like, just a nice, it's almost like a little like tagline review. Imagine a 5-star Yelp review. If you could write
Yeah.
one for everybody and you say, this person always made me laugh. This person came through at the lowest part of my life and was there through it all. This person always, it's like, and it could also be for people that were like, this professional, I would trust them. I've trusted them with everything in my life because I know they would never screw me over for that. And those kinds of endorsements become really valuable for referrals for future things. And we love when people like say that, because especially if it's the person that usually doesn't give compliments, that's the best. Because if all of a sudden you get a compliment from someone who never says much of anything, you're going to realize, wow, that person, I'm going to have a different memory of that. And that memory will last forever. That's when you leave the room, you want it to be the best moment. And leaving on that note makes people feel like, okay, this person was important. This person valued me, and I'll always have a good thought about them for the rest of my life. And that's kind of the goal, which is, you want to be remembered in the best possible light by these people. And also ideally put that goodness onto them so they start treating other people in their lives the way that they, felt they were treated by you.
Again, this book is about love.
Yes.
I really strongly feel that. I know when I was mailing this out to people, my father-in-law got a copy of this book, and he immediately called my wife and he said, is he trying to tell me something? So, we're here at our hour, and Gene, you and I could talk about this forever. And
Yes.
I'm sure not everybody wants to sit and listen to us talk about this forever. But we have the recording of this. If you guys have any questions, reach out to either of us. Appreciate you guys being here. Gene, you did a wonderful job, and I appreciate your time today, and appreciate your business to all the clients that are here. And I know they've invited some family and friends. So I'm really touched by everybody showing up.